Ed Gein held deeply ingrained beliefs passed down to him from his mother Augusta. However, when she was pregnant with Ed, she was hoping for a daughter, as she'd already given birth to another boy a few years earlier. But when that didn't materialise, her goal was changed when Ed was born, to ensure that he wouldn't be like any other males. This caused Augusta to become overprotective of her newborn, leading to her boy growing into a sensitive, shy, and mother-worshipping character. While growing up, he experienced terrible feelings of ugliness, inadequacy, and self-consciousness about who he was as a person, indicating he wasn't happy with himself and felt unattractive both from an internal, physical point of view and internal. As he grew even older, his relationship with this woman who gave birth to him led to his downfall, as the man who was driven to insanity by his mother. The unthinkable crimes he went on to commit inspired the creation of horror novels and movies, including Alfred Hitchcock's classic 1960 film Pscho, where Norman Bates had a mummified mother in his house who he murdered. Whenever Norman felt attracted to the opposite sex, Mother had to murder the woman. Then there was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the Silence of the Lamb movies. Silence of the Lambs featured the Buffalo Bill character, who'd kill women for their skin to make a suit from. And all of this was based on the real-life case of the man we're going to talk about today, Ed Gein. Hi everyone, I'm Royston, and welcome back to Tea and Crime. Do you think it was possible his mother, in effect, created a monster? See, what kind of an influence did she have over him? Well, this is what we're going to be looking at in today's episode. But first, I'd like to invite you to grab yourself a cup of tea before we deep dive into it. Ed Gein's mother, Augusta, was born during the summer of 1878 to a couple of German immigrants who settled down in La Crosse, Wisconsin, in 1870. Her parents were devout Lutherans, raising her alongside several other siblings in a household filled with strict rules and regulations. To deviate from those conditions was met with frequent and painful punishments administered by her father, a man named Friedrich. Somehow, this oppressive and abusive upbringing moulded her to become just like her father. He was domineering, inflexible, humorless, and a religious fanatic. As she turned out to be an image of him, she wholeheartedly believed in the Protestant work ethic, that life is about hard work and self-denial while holding on to old values. At the age of 22, Augusta married George Philip Gein, whose mother was also a German immigrant. Their first child was a son, Henry George Gein, who was born in 1902, followed by Edward Theodore Gein, who arrived in the summer of 1906. Her husband George struggled to hold down a job due to being an alcoholic, yet he worked in various positions such as a tanner, in carpentry, and as an insurance salesman. The couple argued a lot because of George's drinking and difficulties in holding on to a job. She eventually grew to despise him with all of her heart, looking at him with contempt, believing she made an awful mistake marrying this man. But she couldn't bring an end to their marriage due to her strict religious beliefs. The solution to the problems was for George to set up his own business. So in 1909, he became the owner of a small grocery store. However, Augusta took charge of the place as a result of her husband's lack of commitment combined with his heavy drinking. At home, her rules were the ones that mattered, and one of those rules was for the family to move away from La Crosse. See, Augusta believed the city was a modern-day version of Sodom and Gomorrah, fueled by fornication and adultery. She was determined to bring her two boys up in an environment that didn't expose them to the views of the world or the ways of the world. And late in 1913, the family bought a small dairy farm about 40 miles east of La Crosse, but suddenly moved again in 1914 to the farm in Plainfield, which pleased her immensely. The farm was made up of 195 acres, with a two-storey house alongside a barn and other amenities. It was an isolated location where this deeply religious woman had the idea of keeping her two boys safe from the temptations of Plainfield itself. Yet at the time, Plainfield had a population of just over 600 residents, and even today in 2023, less than 900 people live there. Yet, She held this strong belief that Plainfield was filled with sinful, ungodly activities, especially with regard to sexual pursuits. As the boys grew into adolescence, Augusta forced her deeply ingrained beliefs even deeper into their minds. She hated people and urged her children to stay away from their neighbours, avoiding them at all costs as their influence was evil. The only time they mixed with others was when attending school, as that was compulsory. She'd even read out loud from the Bible to them, always choosing passages that warned against lustful desires, making Henry and Ed swear to her that they'd remain pure sexually, especially as she preached to them that all women were whores. I guess they agreed to her demands out of fear, although Ed saw his mum as being almost perfect, whereas Henry eventually started to disobey his mother's rules. In 1940, George, their father, died at the age of 66, which probably came as a relief to his wife, who despised him for years. Ed would have been around 33, 34 at that time. A few years later, in 1944, an alleged accident took place on the Gein farm, when Ed and his brother Henry were burning brush. The fire became uncontrollable, ultimately resulting in Henry's death, which turned out being a mystery. By this point, the family was left with only two members, Ed and his mother Augusta. And let's not forget that over the years he obeyed her as closely as possible. He never socialised or dated because he didn't want to upset her. She successfully moulded him to her liking. Her existence was the only thing he devoted himself to, tending to her every need. And just over a year after his brother's death, he was heartbroken and psychologically unhinged when his mother died in 1945. Now that he was left all alone living on that massive farm near Plainfield, desperately missing his mother, he soon developed his own ideas of how he'd get on with life. And one of those ideas was to keep his mother's room spotless and untouched, perhaps in an effort to repress the fact she was dead. At the same time, Gein fostered a disconcerting curiosity for anatomy and wartime stories of atrocities, sex change operations, and anything concerning the dead, which he initially satisfied by reading numerous books. And as a coincidence, it was around this time that several residents of Plainfield went missing, without trace. One of the people who went missing was Mary Hogan, who owned the Pine Grove Tavern, one of the only establishments Ed Gein regularly visited. In December 1954, Mary vanished from the premises and police found blood on the tavern floor and an empty bullet casing. The following day, while working on an odd job with another local man who employed him named Elmo, that's Ed and Elmo, they discussed the disappearance. Ed said, "She's up at the house right now." But Elmo brushed that comment off as a joke, as he saw him, like other people did, as a bit of a misfit, a rather weird individual. Although Elmo didn't take Gein seriously when he said Mary was at his house, the truth was, well, it was just that. See, Ed had been hanging out at Mary's tavern the day before, drinking with her until it closed. He wasn't a big drinker or anything like that, like his dad, but I guess he was looking for company. But when the bar closed, it wasn't long before only him and Mary were left, so he pulled the blinds together, then placed a pistol to Mary's forehead and pulled the trigger. When she was dead, he loaded the unfortunate 51-year-old divorcee into his Ford pickup truck, driving her to his home 6 miles away from the crime scene, where he defiled her body. In other words, she was butchered. The Plainfield police were perplexed by Hogan's disappearance. Her body wasn't found, and the case was never declared as a murder. No one had a clue what happened. It was a mystery. A mystery that took almost 3 years before the man who was driven to insanity by his mother was identified as her killer. On the 16th of November 1957, Bernice Warden was reported missing. It was the opening day of the deer hunting season, and the majority of the men were out looking for deer, and Plainfield was almost like a ghost town. The previous day, Ed Gein had popped into the Warden hardware store that was run by Bernice since the death of her husband in 1931. During his visit, which was on a Friday, he was asking about the cost of antifreeze. Bernice Warden's son, Frank, who happened to be the local deputy sheriff, was in the store with his mum at the time. Ed inquired of Frank whether he'd be out with the rest of the men the next day, which was a Saturday, for deer hunting. Frank told him he would be, and that he'd be out for a while. This was all the information Ed needed. He told Bernice he'd return on Saturday to collect the antifreeze. So, on the 16th, a Saturday, Gein made his trip into Plainfield, making his way directly to the store, where he found himself alone with Bernice. While there, he took a rifle that was on display, reached into his pocket for a bullet that he brought along with him, loaded the weapon, and cold-heartedly shot Bernice in the head. After that, he dragged her body out the back, placed her in a truck, and drove the 58-year-old to his farm. Meanwhile, Frank, the son of the murdered woman, returned to the store after a day of hunting at around 5 p.m. He noticed it was locked, which surprised him. When he let himself in, he quickly realised his mother and the cash register were missing. Frank's heart was probably beating extremely fast as he followed a trail of blood leading to the back door. The truck belonging to the business was also missing. He immediately suspected it had something to do with Ed Gein. See, Ed had been pestering his mother for the past couple of weeks, as he wanted to take her out, maybe romantically, but she wasn't interested. And Gein had asked Frank the day before whether he was going out on the Saturday to hunt, plus he inquired about antifreeze, telling them he'd return on Saturday to pick it up. All of this was buzzing around in Frank's head, triggering him to make a call to get the authorities totally involved, which they obliged, of course, as he was one of them. It transpired that a sales receipt for a gallon of antifreeze was written out by his mother on the morning she disappeared. All focus was now switched toward Mr Gein, who was swiftly located and apprehended at a neighbour's house. The murderous crimes of the man who was driven to insanity by his mother were about to be uncovered with bizarre yet undeniable evidence the authorities probably never imagined they'd ever encounter. Washoe County Sheriff's officers were dispatched to the Gein property, a 2-story farmhouse, and attached to it was a woodshed, known as the summer kitchen, which contained a pot-bellied stove. It was in that shed that Bernice Warden's body was found. She was found decapitated, hung upside down from the ceiling. Her torso was dressed out like that of a deer, and the officers who were engaged with this ghastly find couldn't control the amount of vomit they threw up. A few hours after finding her body, her heart was discovered in a plastic bag in front of the pot-bellied stove. And this was in fact stated in the official autopsy report by the pathologist, refuting the misunderstanding that the heart was found in a pan on the stove. A pile of entrails, still warm, were wrapped in newspaper, folded inside an old suit. More officers turned up at the grisly crime scene to join the search of the darkened farmhouse, which had no electricity and was in the main absolutely filthy. You'd never expect a human to live in such disgusting conditions. And what they went on to find sent shockwaves that reverberated around the world. Bernice Warden's entire head was located in a sack. Whole human bones and fragments were discovered lying all over the place. Wastebaskets, leggings, lampshades, masks, a corset, and several chairs, all made by female human skin, were observed. But there's more. Investigators discovered 4 noses. There were skulls on his bedpost, plus a number of bowls made from skulls. Additionally, they found a young girl's dress and the vulvas of 2 females who were aged around 15, and a belt that was made from nipples. In a box they came across was the skull belonging to Mary Hogan, the woman who mysteriously vanished almost 3 years earlier, as well as finding a mask made from her face in a paper bag. These were just some of the grisly items found in that atrocious farmhouse. They were collected and photographed at the State Crime Laboratory. Due to Gein's unhealthy devotion to his dead mother, he boarded up all the rooms she spent a lot of time in. He left her bedroom spotless and untouched from the day she died, 12 years previously. Yet the rooms he used were filthy, and he was clearly a hoarder. The Plainfield Police Department had a number of unsolved murders and disappearances they were trying to solve, and because of what was found at Gein's home, they felt he might be behind them. Therefore, they tried their best to pin some of these on him, but despite their efforts, in the end it proved to be unsuccessful. But they had some success when Gein confessed not only to murdering 2 women, but also to robbing graves, where he used several of the corpses to make those grotesque items just described. He visited 3 different cemeteries over the years, digging through freshly laid soil in an attempt to get to recently deceased women around his mother's age. The majority of the human body parts found at his home came from this nocturnal activity, and from his own confessions, he used to parade around outside at night wearing those outfits made from human skin, apparently pretending to be his mother. Very disturbing. After his arrest, local residents flocked to his farm, eager to take a peek through his windows, trying to come to terms with who their neighbour, the man they knew for years, really was, especially as many of them used him to do odd jobs, including babysitting. It caused individuals to revisit 1944, when his brother George died in that brush fire, wondering if Ed had anything to do with that. Considering the brothers got separated during that fire, and Ed ran off to get help, and he guided the search party directly to where his brother was, and also George had a number of unexplained bruises around his head that couldn't be fully accounted for. So the question is, did he kill his brother, or was it genuinely an accident? Well, what do you think? Clearly convinced that the unprecedented crimes of Ed Gein could be viewed as the result of mental health issues, his lawyer William Belter entered a not guilty plea by reason of insanity, as Gein was unfit to stand trial, diagnosed as a schizophrenic, and committed to Central State Hospital for the criminally insane. In the meantime, his possessions were scheduled to be auctioned off on the 30th of March 1958. And rumours spread throughout Plainfield that the house and its land might become a tourist attraction, as this kind of crime drew people in who were fascinated with what had happened. But just prior to the auction, and a massive relief to Plainfield residents, the house mysteriously burnt down. However, Gein's 1949 Ford sedan, the vehicle he used to transport the bodies of exhumed victims from local graveyards, was sold at public auction in a bidding war for $760, a fortune back in 1958, which was won by Carnival sideshow operator Bunny Gibbons. Now, Gibbons later charged Carnival goers 25 cents admission to see it. However, by 1968, doctors felt Gein was mentally well enough to confer with counsel and participate in his defence. So on the 7th of November of that year, his trial began, which was held without a jury, lasting for a week. Gein was found guilty. A second trial then dealt with the sanity issue, and testimony was offered by doctors representing both the prosecution and defence, after which the judge ruled that since Gein was found insane during the initial trial, he was found not guilty by reason of insanity, sending him back to hospital for the criminally insane, where he died due to respiratory failure secondary to lung cancer on the 26th of July 1984 at the age of 77. The man who was driven to insanity by his mother was truly an evil soul. However, after listening to this video, what do you think? Was his mother the cause of his insanity? Or was he a deranged killer on his own merit? Well, let me know what you guys think about this case in the comment section down below. Well, I'm Royston, and I'll see you in the next one.